these idle hours. What to make of all this quiet? So loud, the quiet, it's deafening. All we know is we can't return to how we were, leading to ruin. What to make of canvases? What to paint, and with which colors? I dream of a world. I hope I'm told it's naive, but I hope I dream we undo and tie these tangled knots, divide. It's deafening. All we know is we can't return to how we were, leading to ruin. What to make of canvases? What to paint, and with which colors?
Kia ora koutou, ko Simon Bowden tōku ingoa, one of the administrators on the Aotearoa Arts and Events during the COVID-19 crisis Facebook group, which we are live on now with a weekly show called the Goss going out on Wednesday afternoons, 5:30 p.m. Looking at issues related to the arts sector during this challenging time of COVID-19. Thank you for watching. Hope everybody is okay out there as we move, of course, in Auckland down to level 2 and down to level 1 around the rest of the country. And we're looking forward to, of course, hopefully not too far away, getting Auckland back down to level 1. You were just listening to another COVID collab compilation tune, Defy, with Nikita Bryant on vocals. Nikita Bryant on vocals. Maz Herman drums, Johnny Lawrence bass and organ, Deanne Krieg on synths and vocals, and Jonathan Knott guitar, percussion, synth and voice. And we are grateful to COVID Collab, which you can get on Bandcamp if you're interested in that, for providing our theme music for the Goss, the series on the Facebook group. And today, I'm very excited about today. Some very good friends from right round Aotearoa, from Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin, for very hardworking people who sit with very important roles in our city councils, with deep interest in supporting the arts and connecting artists with opportunities in the city to be able to present work, for very highly knowledgeable people who've been in the arts for a very long time. And I know very dedicated and in past lives have helped me out a lot and still do, especially with my projects in Wellington. So let's meet them. I'll take myself off spotlight and we'll do gallery view. Welcome. Thanks very much for joining me today. Nice to see you all. Thanks. Yeah. So we've got, of course, Catherine George from Auckland, Cara Patterson from Dunedin, Felicity Birch from Wellington, and Kitty Jardin from Christchurch. Kia ora te whānau. Perhaps if we can all just go around one at a time and just tell us who you are and what your how you would describe your role at in council, and then after we've done that, we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the programs that you manage. Let's go down to the bottom of the island first, and well, depending on which way you look at it, isn't it? If you're thinking about Maui, you're down the bottom of the waka, or one end of the waka, and Wellington's the top of the fish, isn't it? So anyway, we'll go to the end of the waka. Cara.
Oh, Kia ora koutou, ko Cara Patterson. I am a relationship advisor at the Dunedin City Council, relationship advisor arts and culture, and I work in our arts team, and I have worked at council for a long time in a community arts advisor role. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting. We were just talking briefly before about all of our different titles, but the core of that is community arts and supporting our artists and arts organisations in the city. I think that part of my role is around connecting artists with funding, and we have a number of funding pools to support our artists and arts organisations. I also have a really privileged role in supporting a couple of our projects that are providing tools for our artists in terms of the Dunedin Dream Brokerage project and also the Dunedin Boosted project. And another piece of work that I'm doing at the moment, which is really long and important, is the Performing Arts Feasibility Study. So this is a piece of work that we're doing in partnership with Creative New Zealand and in partnership with our performing arts community in response to the Fortune Theatre closing in 2 years ago. So we're looking at performing arts infrastructure and then what we need to do as a city to enable performing arts to succeed.
Kia ora, Cara. So it's not just managing the funding application process, it's also strategic thinking and understanding of how to progress. Is that a bit the same for you, Kitty? Or was Kitty frozen? I think she might be frozen. Hopefully Kitty will be unfrozen soon, and we'll go to Felicity. Is it a bit the same for you, Felicity?
Yeah, very much the same, I think. And COVID has certainly thrown up a bunch of new things that we're doing. So part of my role as a senior arts advisor here in Wellington is advising people about funding, different funds that we have. Also, we have quite a lot of arts organisations, both local and national based here, that we engage with on a pretty regular basis. We've got quite good access, so we will talk to Creative New Zealand on a regular basis, which I think other councils do as well. And we're looking at an update of our arts and culture strategy, so working on that, which is quite a big piece of work. In the light, we were looking forward to it being a prioritisation of work, but with COVID, it kind of starts to have conversations about what is your short-term thinking versus your long-term thinking, which is, quite a big thing to consider. So yeah, keeps us busy.
Very busy, very busy. Thanks, Felicity. Kitty, we got you now.
I seem to have returned. Sorry. E mihi ana kia koutou, ko Kitty Jardina ho. I'm Principal Arts Advisor here at Christchurch City Council. Well, actually here I'm at home, but in the office in town. So the role is probably largely around relationships, and that can both be internal and external, particularly when you've got lots of projects on the go throughout the city. So yes, involved in giving advice into our funds, primarily our Strengthening Communities and Discretionary Response funds, with colleagues, although at the moment I'm a single arts advisor, solo arts advisor. We also give advice into creative communities and other pots of funding through council. But we're also, and I'm also sitting around project teams for public art projects as well as rebuild projects, because of course we're not just COVID, we're still dealing with earthquake. And so we've got some major programs happening at the moment that do involve, creation of spaces for the arts sector. Yeah, so it's varied. Yeah.
Varied. Beautiful. Thanks, Kitty. Catherine.
Kia koutou. It's Catherine George. I'm the Regional Funding Advisor for Arts, Community and Events at Auckland Council. So our unit includes our arts programming, public art, our arts advisory teams, our events team who provides support for events but also manage events, and our community empowerment unit. But the bulk of what I do is I manage the regional arts and culture grants program. So Auckland, is massive. So we have 21 local boards. Each of those boards manage their own arts funding as well. But if projects that are regionally significant, then we do have a funding pool for that. But I think that, because we work really across the board with a lot of different, I work across the board with a lot of different areas. We, very much, there's a lot of, sorry, my computer's just going nuts. A lot of links in between different areas that we're working in. So today, before I came on this, I did talk to a lot of our arts advisors about some of the issues and things that they brought up. So what I will be talking about is not just about my experiences. I think like the others, there's just a really lot of connections that we're having. So it's a relationship management.
That's really interesting. So it sounds to me like you're a little bit like the arts practice directors at Creative New Zealand. So that's a team of people, albeit that they are appointed across specific art forms. They have to liaise between Creative New Zealand's funding processes and the policymakers and the sector to be able to report back to the policymakers actually what's going on in the sector, and then helping the sector understand Creative New Zealand as well. And they all end up with quite an extraordinary national kind of strategic overview. They can see where the sector is strong, or the sector is weak, or needs help. But you must. It sounds to me like you're all doing that on a citywide basis, and you've got, of course, venues to think about. So it's not just the health of the specific organisations, but also what venues are available and the barriers and everything. So is that right, Catherine? Are you having to do that kind of thinking?
Yeah, definitely. So especially at the moment with the Ministry of Culture and Heritage looking at their regeneration funding, been really involved in that process alongside our policy staff. It's submitting into that, and which has been really interesting, but that's probably a whole nother show for you, Simon. But yeah, it is a lot of connecting and just really trying to, I know a little bit about lots of things. And it's really about finding the right people to connect and hopefully help as many people as possible.
Yeah, kia ora. And Cara, you've been like deeply involved in the Dunedin creative scene for a long time, haven't you? I remember you getting involved, for example, I'm pretty sure it was you years ago with landlords to talk about setting up venue spaces for visual artists. Is that right? Yeah,
and it's funny you say that, Simon, because it's kind of like that cycle of things that keep going round and round. So we've got before COVID, we had quite a buoyant time in our central city. We've had quite a bit of development that's come in over the top of what has in the past been art project spaces. So we're kind of negotiating that the new business to the city versus where our artists can still have access to spaces. So we did a piece of research actually at the beginning of this year with where we contracted the Dunedin Dream Brokerage actually to meet and talk with artists and also with property owners to try and get a sense of where people were at. And I think, what was highlighted is that we've got like the most extreme shortage of space that we've had in sort of 30 years, which I know that's kind of echoed right across the other centres here. But also a changing environment now with COVID. So we need to go back out and have those conversations again post-COVID.
Yeah, of course. And Felicity, is it a bit the same for you? Are you dealing with ongoing issues like in Wellington? It's obviously not as bad as Christchurch, but we've got earthquake strengthening issues going on with venues, and the general sustainability of practice in Wellington, and then you've got COVID on top of it as well. So it's already an intense space, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's been, as Cara said, there are cycles where space is more available and less available, and you can have spaces that go offline and then all of a sudden there's a real gap in the market. But I think the earthquake strengthening, which has been happening in a lot of spaces where artists were previously in like earthquake prone buildings because they were cheap. And as those are being gradually strengthened, as the deadlines for getting that work done is coming up over the next sort of 10 years, I think, or less, you know, a lot of that capacity in the city is suddenly becoming unaffordable. But it's interesting now with COVID, with some businesses going out and potentially moving out of retail spaces. Is that going to free up space? And that's still, there's some anecdotal stuff, and we're doing some work around trying to get the actual data on what's coming on stream in the city and how it can be used and utilised. And yeah, so it's quite dynamic, and it's really hard to anticipate with COVID. Like obviously we were all bowling along thinking we'd done 100 days, we're all great, and then we're not. And it's sort of, you know, you're starting to think about planning, because we all think about planning over annual cycles or 3-year cycles or 10-year cycles in councils. And suddenly you're kind of, all your plans get thrown up in the air. So you're having to sort of make 2 sets of plans for what type of activity you can get involved with or get going in the city. So yeah, it's quite dynamic and quite hard to anticipate. In a normal process, you'd be able to anticipate that if the trend is going this way, then in a year's time we're going to need this. But at the moment, we're kind of putting out some testers to see what will stick and what won't, and what we'll need to adjust. Just trying to be adaptable.
Yeah, of course. And talking of adaptability, Kitty, I mean, Christchurch is the masters of adaptability in Christchurch, aren't you? And I was talking to Jo Blair from Brown Breed, who now runs the Arts Foundation, of course, is an agency based in Christchurch. She said, we've just learnt so much in Christchurch and have so much to offer. And there's all the silver linings with the sense of how, through Gap Filler and other art projects, you know, Christchurch had this amazing renaissance in a way of arts. And it was, I remember it written up in the Listener, and that felt like a amazing time for culture. You know, is that feeling still there in Christchurch, or has COVID made that, is it much harder? What's going on?
So I think that was probably fair. And I think those few years after the quake, there was a lot of investment in the city, a lot of opportunities, there was openness to doing things differently. And while I think that's still there, if I've got a concern, it's that, you know, we're now heading to 10 years past this first September quake, and that's quite a long time to be resilient. So, you know, people will keep going, and because we do. But I do worry sometimes that it's a little tough, and this just adds a little extra layer of toughness. That said, projects like, and organisations like Gap Filler, Greening the Rubble, who have renamed themselves the Green Lab, and Life in Vacant Spaces, they've continued to operate in the city and brokering spaces for creatives to do projects. And on top of that, our urban regeneration team has continued to develop projects to support activation in the central city. So, I mean, obviously, a few of you would have, you know, been to Christchurch post-earthquake, but, you know, it's quite impactful for the first time, you know, understanding that 80% of the central city was gone, and there's still quite a bit of empty space there. So that's a lot of similar stories, a lot of cheap studio space gone, a lot of workspace, artist-run spaces. And so we still have the bold few that are able to do that. And certainly those bold few were possibly a little better supported post-quake, when we did have that little surge of investment into the city. But yeah, and I think there's lots of creativity, you know, so people will find solutions and keep finding ways to present work and make work.
And that investment, there was a really great response, I understand, from Creative New Zealand to swing in and provide extra funding and support for Christchurch post-quake. But now of course it's dealing with things on a national scale. So we don't know the details really yet on the Ministry of Arts, Culture and Heritage funds, but it would be helpful, wouldn't they, if some of those funds were really channeled through regions and people who can see the strategy and what's required.
Oh, absolutely.
Everybody's nodding.
Yeah, we've all got art strategies. We're fortunate to have a fairly recent one where it was endorsed late last year. We know the community advised on what our priorities were, what things, where they wanted to see investment and advocacy and support. And so it'd be great to have our strategies supported through this funding as well.
Yeah. I mean, we're really interested in seeing how the regions can be part of rolling out the new funding.
Yeah. And Catherine, you've got a slightly different set of challenges, haven't you, with just the scale in Auckland? It's not sort of one central hub, although Christchurch is quite spread out as well, isn't it? So is the culture different and the way practice emerges different in Auckland?
Yeah, absolutely. And so there are a lot of challenges around there. Some of it is met really well by our local boards. And one of the real successes of this COVID time has been the local boards, and not all local boards do this, but local boards that employ an arts broker. So that's an independent role, and the board puts aside funding to employ them for X amount of time, or it might be an organisation that can work really closely with that community, and they also manage a level of funding. And they're really, really getting in then to what that local board area is a priority for them. And what they don't just fund these things that they've got money for, they provide advice, they connect them, they do a plethora of work. So that's been a real great thing this time, because organisations had money and then all of a sudden, we're in lockdown, and those areas that had arts brokers who could work with them, because our 3 arts advisors who work with the 21 local boards can't all be in there helping everybody. So those areas did really well because they helped them. I know we're sick of saying pivot their programs around and look at how things could be either, delivered online or delivered differently, or funding used for planning for something for a later date. So those areas did really well. A massive challenge for Auckland Council obviously was just our budget cuts and the emergency budget being put in place, which really stopped everything. I had the regional funding program that was due to get their decisions in the beginning of April, and they didn't get them until August. So, nothing much would have been happening in there, but it was people were really patient and really kind. And then the budget cuts that we've had to have, like 80% of our public art programming budget gone. That's just, it's just massive. But I didn't want to come on here and be, Debbie Downer. There were really great things happening as well that we saw, like everybody did throughout the country. We had great things locally with some of our community arts centres working on online programs and things. And it was a real priority for council to get our community spaces up and going as quickly as possible. And people worked really hard to do that and deployed staff out from other areas to those community arts centres, which I think was great. And then regionally, there were a couple of really great stories. The Tempo Dance Festival, which was, due to be heading off and starting really quickly. I was really impressed with them, and the Documentary Festival, who both super, super quickly went whoop online. And particularly with the Tempo Dance Festival, I thought they really had a great way of supporting the artists through it. So they put out a call for their things. They got online dance delivery. And when you went and watched something, it was free to watch, but there was a click now to donate to the artist, directly to them, really putting the artist at the centre of what they were doing. So there were some great things, but yeah, we've got a lot of challenges with money.
Yeah. So I guess in a way, Auckland's big challenge is the weight of the infrastructure requirements, the burden on the budget. It's got major issues of rebuilding with earthquakes. So we've all got our issues, and that's the one that's on the weight of the shoulders of everybody in Auckland, and it affects not just the affects everything. So all of our hearts were with you through that really challenging time. But it's really great to hear the regional focus and how people are able to get support locally. That sounds like a powerful.
Yeah, I'd be really interested, and this is part of the thing of looking at what those priorities for that Ministry of Culture and Heritage funding is, to hear from the other councils. So the thing that has just come up for us really a lot has been that the CNZ funding is great. It's creating content and content and content and content, and our venues are really struggling. And a lot of us have real concerns that there'll be all this content developed and nowhere viable to put them. So I'd be really interested to hear from the other areas if this is something, just that thing of the funding of already existing venues, never mind, looking at opening new spaces, whether that's something nationally.
I think venues are a constant push and pull between new venues, updating old venues, making them affordable, having them available. We've got a couple of our bigger venues out at the moment for earthquake strengthening, the city's getting quite crowding out some venues, so that's always an issue. That I was interested to see that MCH did through New Zealand Music Commission doing the support for music venues, independent music venues, which I thought was fantastic, to kind of give them, which is not a sector that we normally engage with, but I think COVID's thrown up a whole bunch of new people in the arts that we don't normally as council engage with, like from an arts team point of view. They might engage with council on a regulatory part, so like dealer galleries and independent music venues and things. But I think that was kind of, then it becomes your knowledge of the city and how the infrastructure and everything works. And I think infrastructure is like a really big kind of growing area internationally around what cities should be investing into the arts. If CNZ is supporting the artists, then there's probably a focus, should be for councils to be focused on the infrastructure. I mean, everyone does a bit of everything, and we also support artists and art projects and things like that. But that's kind of, I guess there's lotteries for some museums and, their big capital building projects, but by and large, venues is very much a council issue constantly. I think there's definitely a lot of work to be done in that area around what we do. There's a great City of London plan, which has they go through and they say what all their issues are in terms of infrastructure, and they say, well, this is a central government regulatory thing, and this is a local government, and this is private owners, and they've kind of stepped out who's responsible for what they can do, and they're trying to say, because I think that's we can't be responsible for everything, so it's trying to divvy up which bits we should be engaged with and which bits are someone else's. So the MCH putting money into the social arts crossover programs and things like that is really interesting, because that sort of hasn't been a big focus from a central government point of view for a while. Yes, opportunities for sure.
So just on that opportunities front, does anybody see a value in that focus on wellbeing being in the care fund? So the care fund's got divided into 4 streams, and of course it's out for negotiation and things might change, but the essence of the idea with the wellbeing stream was, for the first time, to really fund that collaboration between mental health and arts education and arts, social and arts, etc., etc. Does anybody want to comment on whether or not that would be a powerful thing? Kitty, you would have a lot of experience with arts and trauma, for example, in Christchurch.
Yeah, and it's very much a focus of our art strategy, Toi o Tautahi. So we're keen to see increased investment in that space. We know that people engaged in creativity, it does contribute to their well-being. I think there's enough documentation and evidence of that internationally, let alone locally. So we have had a number of our local arts and health providers, you know, they've undertaken evaluation of their projects, and there's no doubting the value of it, you know, to individuals, but to their whānau, to the wider community. So any additional investment in there is great. We know that it can be hard to get support partnership. You know, there is often a little bit of funding through from for the arts component, or from the arts sector, or from the local government sector, but it can be difficult getting that support through from health, because of course their dollars are fairly tight. So any additional investment in that space, I think, will you know, be welcome, but also well spent, I think, too. There are a lot of experienced practitioners and those working in health and arts. So yeah, it's great. It's
yeah.
great area.
I think the intention is to perhaps pilot that space, in the hope that you know, new practice can grow and new opportunities can grow for practitioners in that more partnership space. Cara, and also the wellbeing thing, just simply by having a healthy culture, arts practice part of the city. I mean, I love going to Dunedin, because you can almost feel that behind some door someone is creating something, and it'll be off the wall quite often. You know, how's it going in Dunedin? Do you still feel that kind of pulse of creativity that we all love the city for?
I think, I mean, part of Otiputi's charm is its size, and I think that, you know, we don't have the same challenges that Auckland has about being spread out. So we have lots of artists who are working together across art forms and across art disciplines. So I think that's when that magic happens behind the door, Simon, because people are able to work together in a way that potentially they wouldn't have if they were in a bigger city. So, you know, I think that, as Kitty has kind of acknowledged, our artists are really resilient. I mean, like, I think, you know, we've got a performing arts community who are working in found space quite a lot of the time, because they don't have a space to perform in that's fit for purpose. They've got to make kind of decisions about the types of spaces that they go into based on their budgets, or based on accessibility, or, you know, they're constantly having to make decisions based on not having adequate space. So, you know, they're resilient and they're adaptable and they're passionate, but it's a similar thing. I don't think that can last forever, and I think that the pressure of having COVID uncertainty on top of all that is just, it is creating a kind of underlying layer of stress. But I mean, we still see amazing things happening. Like, there are lots of arts activity. I mean, like, I was just thinking about there's a group called Ra, and they're sort of random acts of art, and they've kind of come from WOW Productions. So they're kind of a theatre-based group, but they're working with visual artists and they're working with musicians, and they're just popping up doing these really generous kind of art installations and interactions in our community. They went to a rest home and then they sung for 4 hours, and, you know, like their residents, the gardener cried because it was just so beautiful to be entertained and cared about. So, you know, like, you know, the message of that is to be kind and take care of each other, and, you know, continue to be resilient. So, you know, that's happening at the same time.
Oh, wonderful. So out of the challenges, you do get these creation of venue. I mean, sometimes the best art is in found space. It's remarkable, isn't it? Of course, it's a challenge to meet all the health and safety requirements. We're not quite doing the things that we used to do. Felicity, in Wellington, there's a big strategy, isn't there? I mean, when the city shut down, the council said immediately, we need our arts and cultural sector up and running as soon as possible. Otherwise, we don't have a humming city. And there was, I'm pretty sure it's unique of all four councils, this establishment of quite a significant multi-million-dollar cultural recovery fund for Wellington. How come? Is it because Wellington is actually reliant on the cultural sector for its economy?
Probably partially that. We also was one of our 5 priorities in the current long-term plan, which is due to finish end of this financial year. So it's always been a part of Wellington, and I think we have a really strong sector that are really good at advocating to council and keeping the arts highlighted with leadership and councillors. So we always have that, and I think it's just part of what Wellington is that it always, talks about it, considers it. We know that people will come into Wellington for those experiences, and we have a lot of local and national organisations here, so Wellington's quite useful touring wise. You can get up to Auckland and you can get down to the South Island. So we do have a lot of, and I think also because we are the capital, so people have access to central government agencies and politicians, so it makes sense for people to be based here because they can have access. So I think there's a lot of reasons why it is that. And just, it's a tradition and a heritage, and that's what people love about it and why they have come here and stayed here if they can. And things change and people come and go. And we also have really good, some really strong tertiary. And I think, like Cara said, actually, the geography of Wellington is quite useful in terms of having a really strong central area that activity happens around. It's quite useful that people do come across each other and are easily found. So yeah, there's a bunch of historic and political and geographical reasons why things work out the way they do for different cities.
An interesting point that you made about the advocacy that comes from the sector, and I did a 2-part Goss series on advocacy and interviewed a whole bunch of different advocacy groups, and one of them was Meg Williams from Arts Wellington, and her approach was different from others. Others would perhaps gather together, do some thinking and write some papers and suggest some changes or advocate, but it seemed to me that Arts Wellington is always there, always available to talk, immediately onto issues, and in constant contact. I imagine she's just a phone call away for you. Is it really helpful to have that kind of activation in the sector?
I mean, it is, and it's good to have someone like Arts Wellington, which represents all the professional arts organisations, and they now have kind of been working to broaden that out into the independent arts sector, rather than just purely the big organisations. We also at council then have to make sure that we're hearing from other sectors like accessibility, community arts, participatory, all the different, like that's part of what council is that advocacy is really great when it's coming with a really specific point of view from that community and we want to hear from them. But then we within council have to make sure that we are being aware of all the other voices out in the community who maybe are less savvy about how to go about advocating for what they want, and making sure we draw those voices into the conversation. So there's a constant tension between people who are really, really good at it and making sure that you hear from the voices of other people who maybe don't know how to go about it. So I think advocacy is definitely something that lots of different parts of the arts community at all levels need to be engaged with, about knowing how to contact your local council or Creative New Zealand or whoever that you want to advocate for your particular part of the arts conversation.
I can tell everybody out there that one of these fine people will always take your call. Catherine, and they're not scary. Catherine, on a big city, is there multiple relationships to manage in terms of a partnership approach to strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even within Auckland Council, even within, if we could just even go outside our arts team, where there's, public art and programming and events, and then we've got ATED and the regional facilities Auckland and all the venues, and it's pretty massive. But we've been doing this has been something that actually has been a really good outcome, is that because everybody is now all au fait with Zoom world, we've got a really great across council group going. with where we might have maybe, 30 or so people all in there, all engaging with across their different areas. We couldn't get all 30 of us in a room before across, all our placemaking and events and, all those kind of things before. So we're really doing, I think, a lot better at listening to each other. And that way we can really see the united voice that is there, and hopefully then be presenting that outwards to national government, but also just really hearing, more about what the communities actually want and what artists need. We can get very focused on arts and culture, but there's that whole creative sector, like, Felicity was talking about in Wellington, that is huge. It's massive, design and all and filmmaking, but it's huge, and we can't have anything too small looking after that in Auckland. So it's been a good outcome from that. I think people realizing that it's not hard to get together for an hour.
No, it's not like yours.
Yeah, and have those bigger conversations. Yeah,
which I'm very grateful for. And Kitty, that resurgence in the arts post quake, did that kind of give the arts a seat at the table in terms of city planning and the way that the councillors are thinking, and has it become important into the fabric of the city? I mean, of course, the advent of the gallery and the art centre already really was important, but was there a shift? Did you notice a shift?
So after the quake, pretty quickly actually, the sector got motivated and established Arts Voice, which brought together a range of representatives from lots of arts across genres. And they did do a great job of advocating for the arts and putting that vision front and centre. So of course, this rebuild of our city is kind of two stories. First, that led by council, and then Sarah and the Crown coming in with the 100-day plan. So it did shift things a little bit, but it sort of had the impact with the Crown coming in of cementing Ngāi Tahu, Ngāi Tuahuriri into the picture. And so we had Arts Voice that they've now disbanded, but they were there for a few years. And what's been set up for Mana Whenua is an organisation that's there representing Mana Whenua around the anchor projects in particular, but also some of our suburban centre master plan rebuilds capital programs, an organisation called Mata Pōpori. And they're there to give advice to develop cultural narratives and to kind of influence and shape development of projects. So that organisation has come about, I think, post-earthquake by necessity, both for the sector and also for hapu and iwi.
Yeah. And did anything get organised during the COVID time?
Through the sector, well, I guess individually they got organised and did what they did. Some organisations were very quick to respond. I guess if we're thinking about council, we're an events and arts team within a wider rec sports and events team. And certainly we moved to do some stuff. We moved to shift funding from events that couldn't take place into grants, quick grants for creating online content. There was a small but a useful thing to do at the time. Yeah,
of course. And on the Build Back Better front, has there been anything that the council learnt that might see a change in the way the arts is funded, supported, thought about?
I guess the influence is there from in the way that the arts have been included into facilities like Metro Sports. There are going to be 3 dance and movement based studios in that venue. One's particularly focused on circus arts, and one focused on dance with a third of mixed use, sort of smaller space. So I mean, that's pretty unique. That's a pretty amazing opportunity in the central city for pretty significant scale dance spaces. Then there's the investment in the Performing Arts Precinct, and that started with investment in the town hall and the completion of that. So the CSO have made that a new home, which is great. It's a bespoke space for them, and it's pretty amazing. So great to have a home-based arts organisation in the town hall. And then, of course, the work is underway now to develop the new theatre, which the Court Theatre will make its home. in the middle of town, which is opposite Tūranga, which is, you know, a pretty stellar library and makerspace actually. So it's, you know, obviously there are books, but there's a whole lot more besides, including recording studios and 3D printing rooms and computer suite sewing rooms. So pretty phenomenal spaces that have been created and influenced by some pretty robust consultation engagement with the sector. And alongside that, mana whenua. So, you know, the cityscape and the landscape of downtown Christchurch is markedly different to the place it was before the earthquake.
And the arts is right in the centre of it.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, fabulous.
Given primacy. So, you know, we once it's all up and running and standing, great. Yeah, lots of opportunity.
Yeah. And Cara, how about you? Any changes to processes or thinking that you think might be semi-permanent? I mean, of course, things are changing all the time, but stuff that you've learnt that might be being adopted into the future.
I mean, I think we had a really interesting piece of work that a community builders did over lockdown, where they talked to sort of 40 different community organisations, which also included arts organisations, and it included our some of our health and disability organisations and some of our Māori and Pacifica organisations, and really asking about what response to that. And a lot of the feedback was around kind of making sure that relationships are kind of key to everything that we do, and funding slightly differently. So funding for kind of equity versus funding for, you know, like for organisations that are potentially resourced in order to be able to get that, you know, like, so they've asked us to look quite differently at how we fund, how we work together as funders, and you know, that they really would like to see that this change in our world will make a change in how we fund, and that we be brave and do that. So they've asked for quite a systematic change in how we fund, which are really tough. It's a really tough conversation to have with us as council and our council processes, and, you know, like the way that funding is allocated and the way that we are sort of tied to 12-month kind of yearly cycles. But it's a good conversation to have, and I'm really hoping that we can follow through and make some changes with that. So
yeah,
I'm very hopeful.
Yeah. When you say they, were you talking about the sector asking for those kinds of fundamental changes?
Yeah. So this piece of work, I've got it right here. It's called Funding for Change. So it was a snapshot of some of our organisations during COVID. But I mean, like, part of the feedback is the conversations that we've been having for a long time anyway about funding differently and funding based on trust. You know, like, you know, organisations that we've worked with forever, you know, like maybe they should be reporting differently to us, and we could enter into a 3-year contract with them instead of making them do an application every year. You know, so it's, I think it's really exciting, and I think it's part of the conversations that we've been having for a long time. So I'm hoping that this shift in line in the sand can make us, you know, step up and do it differently.
So because things are different, a chance for change, but also because COVID brought us all together, helped us understand that we should be collaborating more, made us more aware of the value base that surround us from cultural diversity and engaging properly with Māori, and now there's like sort of the zeitgeist is upon us, then some of those things that we didn't maybe know how to articulate, but now we're getting better at it, might kind of start to land. Well, that's exciting, Cara. What about you, Felicity? Seeing any learnings that perhaps will result in the medium or long-term differences?
Definitely, we spent a bit of time in the early part of lockdown when council was probably more appropriately focused on social, getting food out, homelessness, housing, all those sorts of issues. And so we and our team were kind of more focused on intelligence gathering and finding out who was accessing what parts of CNZ or central government wage subsidies, and trying to sort of within our own team figure out where the need was likely to be and what we should be sort of pivoting, to use the term that we don't like to use, but to kind of, yeah, turning where we should turn. So we were looking into that, and I think that was really useful to kind of be able to have those conversations that we don't always have longer term. And obviously Zoom and Teams and all those great online tools that we've all been using a lot more have enabled us to just be more agile. And I think the agility, because councils are quite big ships to move and turn in a new direction, and it takes time, and you've got a process, and there are regulatory functions that we fulfill, and you have to write papers that have to go through various processes before they even get to the councillors to be, you know, agreed upon. And that's just part of what councils do, because it's public money and we need to be accountable. But there is a where we could be agile and swing into doing things differently. And I mean, we looked at our grants and said, if you can't do a project, just talk to us, and maybe you can use some money for something else that'll help you, you know, maintain yourself during this period. And it was really interesting, and I think we definitely had some really good conversations about what people could do and what kind of activity. And sometimes it's just they will defer it for a couple of months, and sometimes it's about shifting a project to an online from something that was going to be inline. And I think it was all quite exciting, and there was a lot of energy in the early stages, and I'm now seeing that now it's a bit more when we got to the second one, everyone's suddenly like, here we go again. And I think that's going to be the tricky thing about how we maintain the opportunity and the excitement or the energy over a longer period where suddenly it's not new, it's just constantly hard. And as things like the wage subsidy finish, and yeah, it's good. I mean, the CNZ funding was really helpful for a lot of people, and I guess it'll be how that's shifting into the next phase, because it feels like we've kind of passed the emergency phase and we're now into the more difficult recovery and kind of resurgent phase, which is always a bit trickier. But you can make quick decisions and get in at the emergency phase, but then how do you sustain that? And, you know, all of that work into the social space, which is going to be, I think, really exciting. But it's also those programs need a longer time to actually deliver results, and these are just like 2 to 3 year funding opportunities. And then it's like, you know, that's kind of my worry about these things, is that we get a big bump and then it all goes away just as we get into the point where it's becoming really like ongoingly beneficial for the people that they're working with.
Well, maybe, fingers crossed, these things will be seen as pilots, and perhaps other ministries can get involved, and we can learn that it's powerful in the wellbeing space. Basically, you know, you're reducing reoffending, you're reducing mental health issues, and you're actually saving money. It's sort of a bit of a no-brainer. So if we get a bit of a start on it, was great. So the big ship that's hard to turn, but I actually found that it could be quite flexible when things were really challenging. Did you have the same experience, Catherine?
Yeah, I think that we surprisingly did, because like all other councils, the focus was immediately on essential services and well-being. So we did have a bit of time, and I think that our staff really responded really well to get out there and do really great comms with the community. And like Felicity was saying, we did a lot of asking people without wanting to burden people when they're already dealing with all their stuff, but asking people what their needs were, what their difficulties were, if there were ways that we could help as soon as possible, and worked really hard actually to convey the importance of this to other areas of our behemoth Auckland Council, such as the commercial and finance area, about the importance of these things. I did have one time when a manager said, can you, on this list of arts things, tell me which ones have a focus on disadvantaged communities? And I was like, mate, the whole arts community is disadvantaged at the moment. You know, this is really hard, and this is real people who are really struggling. So yeah, but I think that we've done really well, made some good relationships, and can look at some more good programs, hopefully.
We definitely can, and and it's just we're just in such great hands with you and all of you, and the teams that are in behind you. It's not scary to bring up council. It's a great relationship to have. People listen. When I know that you've got, like everybody else who's going to deal with funding, there is limits to the funding, and you're always going to have, you know, at least half the projects, unfortunately, they're great projects, but they can't get through. So anyone that's dealing with contestable funding is also dealing with disappointment. But you know, so so it's a challenging one, that one, and good on you for being brave enough to go through with that that sort of stuff as well. Yeah, so thank you very much. Has anybody got any final comments as we hit 5:30? It's great to see you all together. Do you have some sort of little private Zoom where you swap notes?
Maybe we should start one. I don't think we have one at the moment, but we might need to email around and set one up.
Yeah, definitely. That would be awesome.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, thank you, Simon, for bringing us together.
Oh, you're welcome. Pleasure. Yeah, been looking forward to it all week. So you take care.
Ka kite.
Ka kite.